5 years invisible. Same restaurant, separate blind dates. When cruel words shattered her dignity, he finally saw the woman who cleaned his floors for years. What he did next proved worth isn't ever bought. It's truly recognized. The alarm clock pierced through the darkness at 4:30 in the morning, its shrill beep echoing in the small bedroom. Sarah Mitchell's hand shot out automatically, silencing it before the sound could wake her daughter in the next room. She lay there for just a moment, staring at the ceiling of her modest apartment, gathering the strength to face another day. 42 years old, and this was her life. The same routine, morning after morning, for the past 6 years since her husband David had died. The grief had dulled into something manageable now, but the exhaustion never really went away. It lived in her bones, in the slight tremor of her hands as she pushed herself out of bed, in the heaviness of her limbs as she moved through the pre-dawn stillness. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman who looked older than her years. Sarah ran water over her face, avoiding her own gaze. Her hands, those hands that had once played piano at church, that had held her baby girl for the first time, that had cradled her dying husband's face, now bore the marks of 6 years of hard labor. The skin was rough despite the cheap lotion she applied religiously. The nails were cut short and practical. These were working hands, honest hands. But they weren't the hands of the woman she'd once imagined she'd become. She dressed quietly in the darkness. Black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes that had seen better days. Her uniform, not an official one, but the outfit that every house expected. Clean, professional, invisible. Before leaving, she stopped at her daughter's bedroom door, pushing it open just enough to see Emma's sleeping form. 17 years old now, a senior in high school, dreaming of college, and a future that Sarah was determined to give her, even if it meant scrubbing other people's floors until her back gave out. Emma's acceptance letter to nursing school lay on her desk, the financial aid package circled in red marker. Not enough, never enough. But Sarah would find a way. She always did. "I love you, sweetheart," Sarah whispered into the darkness, knowing Emma couldn't hear her but needing to say it anyway. The bus ride took an hour and a half, transferring twice to reach the neighborhood where people like her employer lived. Sarah watched the city transform through the window as dawn broke, from her world of cramped apartment buildings and corner stores to tree-lined streets with houses that could fit her entire apartment complex inside them. 2 Americas, separated by nothing more than circumstance and luck. By 6:45, she was standing in front of the Ashford mansion. Mansion felt like an understatement. The house sprawled across perfectly manicured lawns, all glass and modern architecture, the kind of place that appeared in design magazines. Sarah had worked for James Ashford for 5 years, cleaning his home 3 days a week, and she could count on one hand the number of real conversations they'd had. She used her key to enter through the side door, moving through the house with practiced efficiency. The kitchen first. Always the kitchen. She started the expensive Italian coffee maker, not for herself, but for him, timing it so the pot would be fresh when he came down. If he came down. Sometimes he left before she arrived. Sometimes he stayed locked in his office until after she left. She existed in his periphery, a ghost who kept his life functioning smoothly while remaining fundamentally unseen. Sarah was wiping down the marble countertops when she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Her stomach tightened reflexively, not from fear. James Ashford had never been cruel or inappropriate, but from something worse, the weight of being nothing, of being so unremarkable that your presence barely registered. "Good morning, Mr. Ashford," she said, keeping her voice neutral and professional. He looked up from his phone, seeming briefly surprised to see her, as if he'd forgotten she'd be there despite it being Tuesday, her regular day for 5 years running. "Oh, Sarah. Morning." He grabbed the coffee mug she'd set out without acknowledgement, his attention already back on his phone. Probably emails. Probably business that mattered to him in ways that real human beings standing right in front of him didn't. She watched him from the corner of her eye as she continued working. James Ashford was 45, though he could pass for younger. The money helped. Personal trainers, expensive haircuts, clothes that fit like they'd been painted on. He was handsome in that way wealthy men often were, not through genetics but through access to every advantage. But there was something hollow in his eyes, something distant and unreachable. He left without another word, and Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The thing about cleaning someone's house was that you learned their secrets, whether you wanted to or not. Sarah knew that James Ashford slept alone in that enormous master bedroom, the other side of the California king perpetually undisturbed, the decorative pillows arranged just so but never actually used. She knew he kept a framed photo of a woman in his office drawer, his ex-wife, Sarah assumed, though she'd never asked and he'd never volunteered. She knew he worked until midnight most nights, evidenced by the cold dinner plates left on his desk, food barely touched, expensive meals wasted while he chased whatever emptiness drove men like him. She knew his favorite coffee mug, the one with a small chip on the rim that he refused to throw away. She knew he listened to classical music when he thought no one could hear, the soft strains of piano drifting through the house. She knew he was lonely, profoundly and desperately lonely, even if he'd never admit it to himself, let alone to the woman who scrubbed his floors. But knowing these intimate details of someone's life didn't mean she mattered to him. She was simply there, like the furniture, useful but fundamentally unremarkable. A function, not a person. She could have been anyone. By early afternoon, Sarah had finished her work. The house gleamed, every surface pristine, every room restored to the kind of perfection that would be disturbed and require her return in a few days. She left her payment, a check, always a check, never handed directly but left on the kitchen counter, and locked the door behind her. The bus ride home felt longer than the one there. Exhaustion settled into her muscles, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that no amount of sleep could cure. But there was dinner to make, Emma's college financial aid forms to review, laundry that wouldn't wash itself. When she opened the door to their apartment, Emma was already there, sprawled on their worn couch with textbooks spread around her. The afternoon light filtered through their small window, casting golden streaks across the cramped living room. It wasn't much, this apartment, but it was theirs. Every piece of furniture had a story, most of them involving discount stores and patient assembly. The coffee table Sarah had refinished herself. The bookshelf Emma had painted bright yellow in middle school, declaring it needed personality. The framed photos covering every available surface, a testament to a life built on love rather than money. "Hey, Mom." Emma looked up with a smile that made every ache in Sarah's body worth it, that made every humiliation endured in silence suddenly bearable. "How was work?" "Same as always, honey." "How was school?" "Boring." "Oh, but Melissa told me about this new dating app her mom is using. Apparently she's met some really nice guys." Emma sat up, fixing Sarah with that look, the one that said she was about to push a boundary she knew existed, but chose to challenge anyway. "You should try it, Mom." Sarah's hand stilled where she'd been hanging up her coat. "Emma, we've talked about this." I know. But Mom, you're only 42. That's not old. And you deserve to be happy. You deserve to have someone who takes care of you for a change, instead of you taking care of everyone else all the time." The words hit harder than Emma probably intended. Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I have you. I have my work. I don't need—" "You never let yourself need anything," Emma interrupted gently. "That's the problem. You've been alone since Dad died, and I'm going to college next year. What then? You're just going to work yourself to death in empty houses for people who don't even see you?" The accuracy of that statement stole Sarah's breath. "It's not that simple," she managed. "It could be." Emma picked up her phone, already scrolling. "Just let me set up a profile for you. You don't have to go on any dates if you don't want to, but just try. For me?" Sarah should have said no, should have held firm to the walls she'd built so carefully around her heart. But looking at her daughter's hopeful face, she found herself nodding before she could stop herself. "One profile, but I'm not promising anything." Emma's squeal of delight echoed through their small apartment, and despite herself, Sarah felt a small flicker of something she'd almost forgotten. Not hope, exactly, but possibility. The tiniest crack in the armor she'd worn for 6 years. She had no way of knowing that across the city, in a mansion far too large for one person, James Ashford was experiencing the same strange restlessness. He stood in his home office, looking at the business reports that used to thrill him, feeling absolutely nothing. The numbers were good. The company was thriving. His portfolio was healthy, and he was miserable in ways he couldn't articulate even to himself. His phone buzzed with a text from his friend Marcus. "You still coming to dinner Friday?" Bringing someone or flying solo as usual? James stared at the message, each word landing like a small accusation. Marcus meant well, but the question stung with the precision of truth. When had he become the solo guy? When had his life narrowed to nothing but work and empty rooms and conversations that never went deeper than business transactions? When had he stopped being a person and become simply a function? A CEO, an investor, a name on contracts but not on anyone's heart? On impulse, driven by a restlessness he couldn't name, he opened his phone's app store and downloaded a dating app. It felt ridiculous. A 45-year-old millionaire using technology to find companionship, swiping through profiles like a college student. But traditional routes had failed him spectacularly. His divorce 3 years ago had taught him that the women in his social circle were more interested in his bank account than in him as a person. Every date felt like a business negotiation. Every relationship came with an unspoken price tag. Maybe anonymity would help. Maybe starting fresh without the weight of his wealth and reputation preceding him would let him connect with someone real. Someone who saw him, not his portfolio. He filled out the profile quickly, using a slightly outdated photo and listing his occupation simply as business consultant. It wasn't a lie exactly, just not the whole truth. As he hit submit, James felt that same small flicker Sarah had experienced across town, that dangerous, fragile thing called hope. Neither of them realized that an elegant French restaurant downtown had 2 reservations scheduled for Friday night. 2 people, each on a blind date arranged by well-meaning friends. 2 strangers seeking connection while terrified of finding it, armor-clad in different ways. Hers built from years of invisibility, his from years of being seen only for what he owned rather than who he was. Each carrying wounds they'd never fully examined, scars that ached in the quiet moments when they allowed themselves to feel. Each invisible to the other, despite 5 years of shared space. 5 years of existing in parallel universes, separated by nothing more than perception and presumption. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony that bordered on cruelty, and a plan that would shatter everything they thought they knew about value, about connection, about the distance between 2 worlds that weren't really that far apart at all. A plan that would force them to see each other, truly see each other, for the first time. And in that seeing, discover truths about themselves they'd spent years avoiding. Friday night was coming. The stage was set. And neither Sarah Mitchell nor James Ashford had any idea that their carefully constructed lives were about to collide in the most unexpected way possible. Friday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Sarah stood in front of her closet, staring at the meager selection of clothes hanging there. Work uniforms, comfortable jeans, a few faded t-shirts, and in the very back, wrapped in plastic from the dry cleaner, the navy blue dress she'd worn to David's funeral 6 years ago. "Absolutely not," Emma declared from the doorway, reading her mother's mind. "You're not wearing the funeral dress to your first date in 6 years. It's the only nice thing I own," Sarah protested weakly. "Then we're going shopping, right now." Emma grabbed her purse with the determination of a general heading into battle. "I've been saving my birthday money. Don't even argue with me, Mom." 2 hours later, they emerged from a department store with a shopping bag containing a dress that had made Sarah's heart stutter when she saw the price tag. Emma had insisted, had literally put her hand over the numbers and said, "You deserve beautiful things, Mom. Let me do this for you." The dress was a deep emerald green, simple but elegant, with 3/4 sleeves and a hem that fell just below her knees. Nothing too revealing, nothing inappropriate for a woman her age, but something that made her look alive in ways her usual wardrobe never did. Back in their apartment, as Emma helped her with makeup, not too much, just enough to brighten her features, Sarah felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest. Not quite excitement, more like terror mixed with the faintest whisper of hope. "You look beautiful, Mom," Emma said, stepping back to admire her work. And for just a moment, looking at her reflection, Sarah almost believed it. The man she was meeting, David, which had made her wince when she first saw the name on the app because it was her late husband's name, seemed nice from their messages. He was a high school history teacher, loved classic movies, had a 10-year-old son from a previous relationship. Nothing flashy, nothing overwhelming. Safe, Normal. Exactly what she needed. Text me if you need an emergency exit, Emma instructed as she called the rideshare. I'll fake a crisis and you can leave. No judgment. I'll be fine, sweetheart. I know you will be. But just in case, you deserve to be treated well, Mom. If he's not kind, if he makes you feel small, you leave. Promise me. Sarah hugged her daughter tight, marveling at when Emma had become the wise one in their relationship. I promise. Across the city, in a bedroom larger than Sarah's entire apartment, James Ashford was experiencing his own crisis of confidence. He stood in front of his closet, rows of expensive suits, designer shirts, shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and felt paralyzed by choice. What did a man wear to meet someone real? Everything he owned screamed money. Even his casual clothes had designer labels that would be recognized instantly by anyone who paid attention to such things. He settled finally on dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. No logo. Nothing ostentatious. He left the Rolex in his drawer, replacing it with a simple watch he'd bought on impulse years ago and never worn. In the mirror, he looked like an approximation of a normal person. Close enough, maybe, to not scare her off immediately. Her name was Jennifer. She worked as a librarian, loved mystery novels, had mentioned in her messages that she preferred coffee shops to fancy restaurants, but was willing to try the place he'd suggested. She seemed genuine in a way that the women in his usual circles never managed. Or maybe he just wanted her to be genuine so desperately that he was projecting. The restaurant, La Colline, was one of the most exclusive in the city, the kind of place James normally frequented for business dinners. He'd chosen it partly out of habit, and partly because he wanted the evening to be special. He'd called ahead, requested a quiet table, mentioned it was a first date. The staff knew him, of course, knew his usual order, knew exactly how much to hover without being intrusive. As his car pulled up to the restaurant, James felt something he rarely experienced. Nervousness. Real, genuine anxiety about whether someone would like him. Not his money, not his connections. Him. Sarah arrived at La Colline 15 minutes early, a habit born from years of punctuality being the only power she had in her work life. The moment she stepped out of the rideshare and saw the elegant facade, the valet service, the subtle lighting that screamed exclusive, her stomach dropped. This was a mistake. David, the history teacher, had mentioned trying that new French place downtown, and she'd assumed he meant one of the trendy bistros that had been popping up in the arts district. Not this. Not a restaurant where the prices weren't listed on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. She thought about getting back in the car, thought about texting Emma for that emergency exit before she even went inside. But she'd come this far. The dress Emma had bought her deserved at least an attempt. The hostess at the entrance looked her up and down with a practiced eye that made Sarah feel immediately evaluated and found wanting. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under Mitchell, for 2 at 7. The hostess checked her tablet, and something in her expression shifted subtly. Not quite disapproval, but close. "Of course. Your table is ready. Follow me, please." Sarah followed through the restaurant, acutely aware of every eye that tracked her movement. The other diners here wore their wealth casually. Women in dresses that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Men in suits that fit like they'd been tailored to their bodies. The crystal chandeliers overhead cost more than her car. The art on the walls would fund Emma's college education 3 times over. She didn't belong here. Everyone could see it. She could see it reflected in the subtle way the hostess walked just slightly too fast, as if eager to deposit Sarah at her table and return to more appropriate guests. The table was near the back, tucked in a corner. Good for privacy. Terrible for Sarah's growing sense that she'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. She sat down, the chair more comfortable than anything in her apartment, and tried to control her breathing. Across the restaurant, seated at a table with better placement and better lighting, James nursed a glass of wine and tried not to check his watch every 30 seconds. Jennifer was late. Not terribly late, only 10 minutes, but enough to make him wonder if she'd seen him through the window and decided he wasn't what she'd expected. He was about to check his phone when he saw her enter, or rather, when he saw someone who might be her. The photos on the app had been slightly blurry, obviously taken with a phone's front camera in less than ideal lighting. But the woman being seated across the restaurant, the one in the emerald dress who looked like she was fighting the urge to run, matched the general description, except she was being seated at completely the wrong table. He'd specifically requested table 7, the best table in the house. That was table 19, where they put people who called without reservations or showed up with questionable credit cards. James frowned. He was about to get up, about to go speak with the hostess, when his actual date walked in. Jennifer was 40, blonde, wearing a dress that probably came from a boutique in the shopping district where James maintained an apartment he rarely used. She walked with confidence, smiled at the hostess like they were old friends, and was immediately directed toward his table. "James?" she said as she approached, her smile wide and practiced. "Jennifer, it's wonderful to meet you in person." He stood, pulled out her chair, fell into the familiar patterns of first-date behavior. But even as he made small talk, even as Jennifer launched into a story about her commute that somehow involved dropping names of the luxury gym where she worked out, James's attention kept drifting to that table in the corner, to the woman in the emerald dress who sat alone, checking her phone with increasing frequency, her posture gradually deflating from hopeful to resigned. Something about her tugged at his consciousness, something familiar he couldn't quite place, the way she held herself perhaps, or the careful way she touched the silverware, as if afraid of leaving fingerprints. "James, did you hear what I said?" He snapped his attention back to Jennifer, who was looking at him with barely concealed irritation. "I'm sorry. Yes. Your Pilates instructor, that's interesting." Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly, and James recognized that look. She'd expected him to be more attentive, more impressed, more something. This was going poorly. But then again, so was the evening for the woman in the corner, whose date was now 20 minutes late, according to the elegant clock on the wall. Sarah checked her phone for the 15th time. No messages from David. She'd texted him 10 minutes ago. "I'm here at La Colline, table near the back." But the message showed as delivered, but not read. The waiter appeared at her elbow, barely masking his impatience. "Have you decided what you'd like to order?" "I'm still waiting for someone," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just a few more minutes." "Of course." "May I bring you something to drink while you wait?" She scanned the wine list, saw nothing under $30, and felt her face heat. "Just water, please. With lemon." The waiter's expression confirmed what Sarah already knew. She was exactly the kind of customer they didn't want, the kind who ordered water and took up valuable table space during prime dinner hours. As he walked away, Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This had been a mistake, a terrible, humiliating mistake. David wasn't coming. Either he'd seen her and decided she wasn't worth his time, or he'd never intended to show up at all. She'd been stood up at the most expensive restaurant in the city, wearing a dress her daughter had bought with birthday money, feeling like an absolute fool. She should leave. Should just stand up and walk out with whatever dignity she could salvage. But the thought of walking past all those tables, all those perfectly dressed people who'd witnessed her sitting here alone like the desperate middle-aged woman she apparently was, felt impossible. So she sat and waited and felt herself becoming smaller with each passing minute. From his table, James watched this unfold with growing discomfort. Jennifer was still talking, something about her book club and how difficult it was to find good help these days, but he'd stopped pretending to listen, because he'd finally placed why the woman in the corner looked familiar. She moved like Sarah, his Sarah. The woman who cleaned his house, who he saw 3 times a week and had somehow never really looked at in 5 years. But it couldn't be her. His housekeeper didn't wear emerald dresses and sit in expensive restaurants. She wore uniforms and existed in the background of his life, present, but not really there. Still, something about her. And then she turned slightly, reaching for her water glass, and the light caught her face just right. It was her. Sarah Mitchell was sitting alone in La Colline, clearly on a date that had gone terribly wrong, looking like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. And James felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for longer than he cared to admit. Recognition. Not just of her face, but of her pain. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself in 100 different situations. Being seen but not valued, being present but not mattering, being convenient but not cherished. He knew, with sudden and uncomfortable clarity, that he'd been one of the people who'd made her feel that way, for 5 years. "Excuse me," he said to Jennifer, standing abruptly. "I need to..." There's someone I need to speak with. What? Now? James, we're in the middle of… But he was already moving, drawn across the restaurant by something he couldn't name and didn't fully understand. Just that Sarah Mitchell was sitting alone, looking devastated, and he'd spent 5 years making her invisible. Tonight, finally, he was going to see her, and everything was about to change. Sarah's phone buzzed in her hand, and for one desperate moment, she thought it might be David with an explanation, an apology, anything. But it was just Emma. How's it going? Is he nice? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could lie, could say it was wonderful, that David was charming, that she was having the time of her life, but she couldn't bring herself to type the words. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across her table. Sarah looked up, expecting the waiter returning to judge her water-only order, but instead found herself staring at a man she recognized immediately, despite being completely out of context. James Ashford, her employer, standing at her table in La Colline, looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, something almost like concern. Mr. Ashford? The words came out as barely more than a whisper. This couldn't be happening. Of all the people to witness her humiliation, it had to be him. The universe's cruelty knew no bounds. Sarah. He said her name like he was testing it out, like he'd never actually spoken it before despite 5 years of employing her. "What are you doing here?" The question landed like an accusation, even though his tone wasn't harsh. What was she doing here? In a restaurant far above her station, wearing a dress she couldn't afford, waiting for a man who clearly had no intention of showing up? I was meeting someone. She clutched her phone tighter, as if it could shield her from this moment. But he's not coming. She watched James's jaw tighten, watched something flash across his face that looked almost like anger. But not at her, at something else. "How long have you been waiting?" 30 minutes. The admission made her feel pathetic. 30 minutes of sitting alone while the staff silently judged her, while other diners glanced her way with pity or contempt, while her daughter's birthday money sat wrapped around her body in the form of a dress that suddenly felt like a costume. James pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking permission. The gesture was so unexpected that Sarah simply stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Mr. Ashford, you don't have to." "It's James," he interrupted gently. "And I know I don't have to, but I'm going to." From across the restaurant, Jennifer watched this interaction with growing irritation. Her date had just abandoned her mid-conversation to sit with some woman in a department store dress. The woman wasn't even anyone important. Jennifer could tell by the cheap shoes, the way she held herself like she was afraid to take up space. Jennifer signaled the waiter with the imperious gesture of someone accustomed to immediate service. "Excuse me, do you know who that woman is? The one my date just ran off to?" The waiter, who'd been observing Sarah with barely concealed disdain for the past half hour, leaned in conspiratorially. "I believe she's waiting for someone who isn't coming. She's only ordered water." Jennifer's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. A gold digger, then. Probably saw James Ashford and decided to make her move. How predictable. How pathetic. She stood, smoothing her designer dress, and walked over to their table with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything in her life. "James, darling," she said, her voice carrying just enough to ensure nearby tables could hear. "Is everything all right? Our food should be arriving soon." James looked up at her, and Sarah saw something in his expression shift. A wall going up. A mask sliding into place. "Actually, Jennifer, I don't think this is going to work out." Jennifer's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. "Excuse me? I apologize for wasting your time, but I think it's best if we end the evening here." He stood, pulled out his wallet, and placed several bills on their table, far more than their drinks had cost. "Please, order whatever you'd like. It's on me." "You're ending our date to sit with…" Jennifer looked at Sarah with undisguised contempt, taking in the nervous way Sarah's hands twisted in her lap, the slight tremor in her shoulders. "With her? Seriously?" "Yes." The word was simple, final. Jennifer's composure cracked, just slightly. "Do you have any idea who I am? My father…" "I don't care who your father is." James's voice remained calm, but carried an edge that made several nearby diners turn to watch. "I care that you're standing here insulting someone you don't know, making assumptions about her based on nothing but how she looks." "Oh, please." Jennifer laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Look at her dress. Look at her hands. She gestured towards Sarah, who'd instinctively hidden her hands under the table. She's obviously not from our world, James. Whatever sob story she fed you, she didn't feed me anything. James stepped between Jennifer and Sarah, blocking her line of sight. But you've told me everything I need to know about you. The restaurant had gone almost silent now, conversations dropping to whispers, all attention focused on the drama unfolding near table 19. Sarah wanted to disappear, wanted to sink into the floor and never resurface. This was worse than being stood up. This was public humiliation on a scale she'd never imagined. Mr. Ashford, please. She tried to stand. You don't need to. It's James, he repeated, his voice softer now. He turned back to her, ignoring Jennifer completely. And yes, I do need to. Because for 5 years, I've treated you like you were invisible. I've walked past you in my own home without really seeing you. I've taken your work for granted, your presence for granted, you for granted. And I'm ashamed of that. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. This couldn't be happening. Her employer was standing in the middle of the city's most exclusive restaurant, defending her in front of everyone, saying things she'd never expected to hear from anyone, let alone from him. You don't understand, Sarah whispered. I'm just the help. I clean your house. This, she gestured around the restaurant, at her dress, at everything. This isn't my world. Then maybe it should be. James sat back down, facing her directly now, his full attention on her in a way that made her breath catch. Maybe we've all been living in the wrong worlds. Me in my empty mansion. You thinking you don't deserve nice things. Both of us so lonely we had to turn to apps to find someone who might see us as human beings. A sob escaped Sarah's throat before she could stop it. Because he was right. God help her. He was absolutely right. Jennifer made a disgusted sound. This is pathetic. You're pathetic, James. Throwing away a real connection for some... A real connection? James didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made Jennifer stop mid-sentence. We've known each other for 2 hours, and you've spent most of that time talking about your Pilates instructor and complaining about your housekeeper. You don't know anything about me except what my bank account looks like. He gestured toward Sarah. This woman has been in my home 3 times a week for 5 years. She's seen me at my worst. Unshaven. Angry after bad business deals. Drunk after my divorce was finalized. She's never judged, never gossiped, never asked for anything beyond her paycheck. She's raised a daughter alone, worked herself to exhaustion, and still shows up every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday with a smile on her face. Sarah was crying openly now, no longer trying to hide it, because no one had ever described her like that. No one had ever seen her sacrifices, her strength, her quiet dignity. David certainly hadn't. He couldn't even be bothered to show up. But James Ashford, the man she'd spent 5 years being invisible to, saw her now with such clarity it took her breath away. So, yes, James continued, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. I'm choosing her. Not because I have some savior complex. Not because I feel sorry for her. But because in the 2 minutes I've spent really looking at her, I've seen more authenticity than I've seen in 10 years of dating in my social circle. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen sounds seemed muted. Every eye was on them, some pitying, some scandalized, some unexpectedly moved. Jennifer opened her mouth, closed it, then spun on her designer heels and stalked out, her exit dramatic enough that a few people actually clapped softly. The hostess rushed after her, apologizing profusely to a retreating back. James turned back to Sarah, and the vulnerability in his expression made her heart stutter. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I've made a scene. That's probably the last thing you wanted tonight. Sarah laughed wetly, wiping at her tears with her napkin. Actually, my date standing me up was the last thing I wanted. I don't even know what this is. It's honest. James reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand, her rough, work-worn hand, and held it gently. Sarah, I know this is incredibly forward. I know I'm your employer, and that makes things complicated. I know I've been blind and thoughtless, and I have no right to ask anything of you. But would you let me buy you dinner, not as your employer, just as someone who would really like to get to know you, really know you? The way I should have been doing for the past 5 years. Sarah looked at their joined hands. His were smooth, unblemished by labor. Hers were marked by years of cleaning solution and hard work. They shouldn't fit together. By all rights, this moment shouldn't be happening. But it was happening. And for the first time in 6 years, Sarah felt something other than exhaustion and resignation. She felt seen, valued, possible. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, or say no. But please don't say what you think you should say. Say what you actually feel. Sarah took a shaky breath. Emma's words from earlier echoed in her mind. You deserve to be treated well, Mom. If he makes you feel small, you leave. James wasn't making her feel small. He was making her feel enormous, significant, impossible to ignore. He'd chosen her over someone from his world, had defended her publicly, had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time. Yes, she whispered. Okay, yes. The smile that broke across James's face was like sunrise, slow, warm, transforming everything it touched. He signaled the waiter, who approached with considerably more deference than he'd shown Sarah earlier. We'd like to see the menu, please. And a bottle of your best wine. He looked at Sarah. Unless you prefer something else? Wine is fine, Sarah managed, still slightly stunned by the turn her evening had taken. As the waiter retreated, menus in hand, James squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Thank you for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. You stood up for me, Sarah said simply. You saw me when everyone else saw right through me, including you, for 5 years. I know, and I can't take that back. But maybe, he paused, searching for words, maybe I can spend the rest of tonight, and however many nights you'll give me, making up for it, learning who you really are, showing you that you deserve to be seen. Sarah felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd kept carefully locked away since David died. Hope, terrifying, fragile, dangerous hope. And for once, she didn't try to shut it down. She let it bloom, uncertain and trembling, as James Ashford, millionaire, employer, stranger, who'd suddenly become something else entirely, looked at her like she was the most important person in the room. Because for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah Mitchell felt like maybe she was. The waiter returned with menus and wine, his entire demeanor transformed from earlier. Where before he'd barely masked his disdain, now he was all attentiveness and deference. Not because Sarah had changed, she was still the same woman in the same department store dress, but because James Ashford had claimed her as someone worth noticing. Sarah hated that it worked that way, hated that her value in this space was only recognized when reflected through someone else's wealth and status. But she was too exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the evening to fight that battle right now. The duck is excellent here, James said, studying the menu. Then he paused, lowering it to look at her with sudden uncertainty. But I'm doing it again, aren't I? Assuming, deciding things for you. You were just making a recommendation, Sarah said softly. No, I was... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him look younger, more approachable. I spend so much time in business meetings where I'm expected to take charge, make decisions, control the room. It's become automatic. But this isn't a business meeting, and you're not someone who needs me to take charge. Sarah felt something shift in her chest at his words. When was the last time someone had asked what she wanted instead of assuming? When was the last time anyone had cared whether she was uncomfortable or checked if they were overstepping? I don't know what half these things are, she admitted, looking at the French descriptions on the menu. I don't usually eat at places like this. Neither do I, really. Not for pleasure, anyway. James set his menu down completely. It's always business dinners, networking events, things where the food is secondary to the deals being made. I couldn't tell you the last time I actually tasted what I was eating. There was something so honest in that confession that Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. So we're both out of our element. Completely. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Sarah realized she'd never seen him smile like that, not in 5 years of working in his home. Professional nods, polite acknowledgments, but never this genuine warmth. How about we just order what sounds good and not worry about whether we're doing it right? They ordered. Sarah chose the salmon because it was one of the only things she recognized. James ordered the steak. When the waiter suggested wine pairings, James looked at Sarah questioningly, rather than deciding for them both, and she nodded, trusting his judgment on something she knew nothing about. Once they were alone again, silence settled between them. Not quite comfortable yet, but not hostile. Searching, each of them trying to figure out how to bridge 5 years of being strangers who shared space. "Tell me about Emma," James said finally. "Your daughter. She's in high school, right?" Sarah's face immediately softened the way it always did when someone asked about her daughter. "She's a senior, 17, applying to nursing schools." "Nursing? That's ambitious. She wants to help people. Has since she was little." Sarah found herself smiling at the memory. "When she was 8, she found a bird with a broken wing in our apartment complex parking lot. Spent 3 weeks nursing it back to health in a box in her room. I kept telling her it might not survive, but she refused to give up on it. And it flew away eventually, strong and healthy." "She sounds like her mother," James said quietly. Sarah looked up, startled. "What?" "Refusing to give up. Nursing broken things back to health. Taking care of everyone around you." He leaned forward slightly. "Who takes care of you, Sarah?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to say something deflecting, something about being fine, about not needing taking care of. But looking into his eyes, really looking, she found she couldn't lie. "No one," she whispered. "Not since David died." "Tell me about him, if you want to." And somehow, surprisingly, she did want to. He was a construction worker. Strong hands, big laugh, terrible sense of humor. He could make me smile when I wanted to scream. She twisted her napkin in her lap. "We were high school sweethearts. Got married at 20. Emma came 2 years later. We had this whole plan. Save money, buy a house, give her everything we never had." "What happened?" "Motorcycle accident. He was riding home from work and a drunk driver ran a red light." The words came out flat, emptied of emotion through repetition. She'd told this story so many times it no longer felt like hers. "He died instantly. They told me he didn't suffer. I'm not sure if that makes it better or worse." James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I can't imagine. I'm so sorry. It was 6 years ago. You learn to live with it. Not past it, but with it." She looked at him. "What about you? You mentioned a divorce earlier." 3 years ago. Her name was Catherine." He picked up his wine glass, stared into it like it held answers. "We met at a charity gala. Got married 6 months later because that's what you do when you're successful and she's beautiful and everyone tells you you're the perfect couple. But you weren't. We barely knew each other. She loved the lifestyle, the houses, the parties, the social standing. I loved that she seemed to love me. Or I thought she did." He took a drink. "Turned out she loved what I could provide. When I suggested cutting back on work, spending more time together, actually building a life instead of just maintaining an image, she divorced me, said I'd become boring. That must have hurt. It did, more than I wanted to admit." He set the glass down. "But honestly, the worst part wasn't the divorce. It was realizing I'd spent 2 years married to someone, and we'd never had a single real conversation. We talked about guest lists and decorator choices and which charity to support for the tax benefits. But we never talked about fears or dreams or what kept us awake at 3 in the morning. "What does keep you awake at 3 in the morning?" Sarah asked quietly. James looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable flash across his face. "The feeling that I'm building this empire, this life that looks successful from the outside, but it's completely empty. That I'm 45 years old and I can't name a single person who actually knows me, who sees me as more than a bank account or a business opportunity." He paused. "What about you?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Money. Always money. Making sure Emma can go to college. Making sure we can afford rent. Hoping I don't get sick or hurt because I can't afford to miss work. Wondering if I'm doing enough, being enough, giving her the life she deserves. She's lucky to have you. She deserves more than luck. She deserves certainty, security, options." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "She deserves a mother who doesn't have to scrub floors to keep the lights on. There's no shame in hard work," James said firmly. "None." "I'm ashamed I ever made you feel like there was." Their food arrived, interrupting the moment. The waiter served them with flourish, explaining each dish in detail that neither of them really heard. They were too busy looking at each other, seeing each other, recognizing something neither had expected to find. They ate slowly. conversation flowing more easily now that some of the barriers had come down. Sarah learned that James had wanted to be an architect when he was young, but his father had pushed him into the family real estate business, that he played piano late at night when he couldn't sleep. Sarah realized she'd heard the music sometimes when she arrived early, distant notes drifting through the large house. That his favorite movie was an old black-and-white film about a man who learns to appreciate what he has, rather than chasing what he doesn't. James learned that Sarah had dreamed of being a teacher but had gotten pregnant senior year and put those dreams aside. That she loved old jazz music and kept a collection of vinyl records her father had left her, played on a cheap turntable in her small apartment. That she'd been taking online courses whenever she could afford them, working toward a degree one class at a time, refusing to give up on education entirely even though it would take years. "Why haven't you told me any of this before?" James asked, halfway through the meal. "In 5 years, why didn't I know you loved jazz or wanted to teach or that you're working on a degree?" Sarah set down her fork carefully. "Because you never asked. And honestly, why would you? I was there to clean your house, not be your friend. That shouldn't matter. You were in my home, in my space. I should have seen you as a person, not just a function." "Most people don't," Sarah said simply. "That's how it works when you're the help. You're supposed to be invisible. Professional distance, they call it. It's not professional. It's cruel." James looked genuinely angry now, but not at her. At himself, at the system, at the casual way people like him had dehumanized people like her. "And I participated in it without even thinking. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have cared enough to know." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you say yes to dinner? After everything, after me being blind for 5 years, after the scene with Jennifer, after all of it, why did you agree to stay?" Sarah considered the question carefully. She owed him honesty, especially after he'd been so honest with her. Because for the first time in 6 years, someone saw me. Really saw me. Not as David's widow or Emma's mother or the woman who cleans houses. Just as me. Sarah. She felt tears building again but didn't try to hide them. And because when that awful woman was insulting me, when she pointed out my cheap dress and my work-worn hands, all the things I'm most ashamed of, you defended me. You didn't agree with her or look embarrassed by me. You chose me. "I'll always choose you," James said, and the intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "I know I don't have the right to say that. I know we barely know each other, not really. But Sarah, something happened when I saw you sitting here tonight. Something clicked into place that's been missing for so long I'd forgotten it could exist." "What clicked into place?" "Purpose, meaning. The feeling that maybe I'm not just going through motions anymore. That maybe there's something real I can build instead of just accumulating more things I don't need." Sarah's phone buzzed on the table. Emma. The text read, "Mom, it's been over an hour. Are you okay? Should I call the police?" She couldn't help but laugh, even as tears slipped down her cheeks. "My daughter thinks I've been kidnapped. You should call her. Let her know you're safe." Sarah looked at him across the table. This man who'd been a stranger for 5 years despite proximity, who'd suddenly become someone she couldn't stop seeing. How do I explain this to her? I don't even understand it myself. Tell her the truth, that your date stood you up, but something unexpected happened. Something good. Something that might be the start of something important. He smiled softly. "If that's okay with you." Sarah picked up her phone, typed quickly. "I'm okay. Better than okay. Tell you everything when I get home. Don't wait up. Might be late." Emma's response was immediate. "OMG, Mom! Is he nice? Are you being safe? I need details." Sarah smiled at the screen, then looked back at James. "She's excited for me." "Of course she is. She loves you. She wants you to be happy." He paused. "Are you? Happy, I mean?" Sarah thought about the question. About sitting in this expensive restaurant where she didn't belong, wearing a dress bought with her daughter's birthday money, sharing wine with a man who'd written her paychecks for 5 years without really looking at her face. About how terrifying this all was, how easily it could all fall apart, how many ways this could end in heartbreak. And then she thought about the way he'd defended her, the way he'd seen her shame and refused to let it define her, the way he'd asked about her dreams and listened, really listened, to her answers. the way he'd admitted his own loneliness and let her see his vulnerabilities. "Yes," she said finally. "Right now, in this moment, I'm happy." "Then that's enough." James lifted his wine glass. "To unexpected evenings. To seeing people we should have seen all along. To taking chances that terrify us." Sarah lifted her glass, clinked it gently against his. "To being seen." They drank, and in the candlelight of La Colline, surrounded by people who still whispered about what they'd witnessed, Sarah Mitchell and James Ashford began building something neither had expected and both desperately needed. A bridge between two worlds. A connection based on truth rather than convenience. A possibility that the distance between their lives wasn't as vast as it had always seemed. And for the first time since that terrible night 6 years ago, when a police officer knocked on her door with news that shattered her world, Sarah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be happy after all. 3 weeks after that night at La Colline, Sarah stood in front of James's mansion with her cleaning supplies and a decision that had kept her awake for days. She'd continued working for him while they dated on weekends. They'd agreed to keep things separate. Her job was her job, their relationship was something else. But Sarah couldn't do both anymore. Couldn't scrub his floors knowing what his hands felt like holding hers. Couldn't maintain professional distance in a house where she'd cried in his arms. The door opened before she could use her key. James stood there, his expression uncertain. "We need to talk," they said simultaneously. Then both laughed shakily. Sarah set her cleaning caddy down. "I can't keep working for you." Relief crossed his face. "I was going to say the same thing. Not that I want you to quit, but this isn't fair to either of us." "I need the money," Sarah said bluntly. "Emma's college fund is short. I have bills." "I know, which is why I spoke with my friend Margaret. She runs a nonprofit providing educational opportunities for working adults. They need an administrative coordinator, managing scholarship programs, working with applicants. The pay is comparable, year-round, with benefits." Sarah stared at him. "You got me a job? I made an introduction. The interview is yours. But Margaret knows I respect your work ethic." He leaned forward. "Sarah, you wanted to be a teacher. This isn't teaching, but it's helping people get education, using your experience of fighting for opportunities. I don't have office experience. You manage schedules, handle finances, communicate with clients, solve problems constantly, and you've been taking online courses for years. You're more qualified than you think." Tears built in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve better than scrubbing floors. Not because there's shame in it, but because you have more to offer, and because I want us to be equals. We'll never be equals. You live in a mansion. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment." "I live in an empty house," James corrected. "You live in a home filled with love. Which one of us is actually wealthy?" Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. "Emma." "Honey, is everything okay?" "Mom, I need you to come home. Now, please." Emma's voice was tight, controlled. "I'm on my way." "I'll drive you," James said immediately, grabbing his keys. They made the drive in 25 minutes, Sarah rigid with worry. When they arrived, Emma sat on the steps outside, her face tear-stained but not injured. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. Physically." Emma wrapped her arms around herself. "But Mom, I lost the scholarship. The full ride to nursing school." The words landed like a punch. That scholarship had been everything. Their plan, their hope. "Why?" "Your grades are perfect. They said I didn't demonstrate enough financial need. Because you've been working so hard, we're just above the cutoff." Emma's voice broke. "Your hard work disqualified me for help." The cruel irony stole Sarah's breath. "We'll figure it out. I'll get a second job." "No, Mom. You're not killing yourself more than you already do. I'll take a gap year." "Absolutely not. You're going to college this year. Let me help," James said quietly. Both women turned to him. Sarah shook her head. "No, I won't accept charity." "Not charity, an investment." James's voice was gentle. "My company has a scholarship fund for children of employees. It's established, funded, legitimate. Sarah, if you take that job with Margaret's nonprofit, Emma would qualify." Sarah's mind raced. "That's convenient. It's real. Call Margaret right now. The position comes with educational benefits for family members. Not something I created specifically for you." He looked at Emma. You'd still have to maintain grades, meet requirements. It's not a handout. Emma's eyes went wide with hope, but she looked at her mother, waiting. Sarah realized they'd fallen into a pattern. Emma asking for nothing, Sarah providing everything, both so focused on survival they'd forgotten how to accept genuine help. Emma, go inside. I need to talk to James alone. Once Emma left, Sarah faced him. You can't just fix all my problems with money. I'm offering a legitimate job with standard benefits. If you were anyone else, you wouldn't hesitate. He stepped closer. Sarah, why is accepting help so hard? Because help comes with strings. Because if I accept this, I'm admitting I can't do it alone, and independence is all I have left. No, James said firmly. You have strength that has nothing to do with refusing help. You have dignity nobody can take. You have a daughter who adores you. You have worth that exists completely separate from this job opportunity. But if I take this, if Emma gets that scholarship, then I owe you. And I've spent 6 years owing nothing to anyone. I can't depend on someone who might leave. There it was. The truth she'd been avoiding. You're afraid I'll die like David did, James said softly. Or leave like Catherine left me. You're afraid to depend on anyone. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I can't promise I won't die. None of us can. I can't promise perfection. He stood solid, present. But I can promise this. I see you. Not as a project or someone who needs fixing. I see a strong woman who's been carrying impossible weight alone for too long. I'm not asking you to stop being strong. I'm asking if I can help carry some of that weight with you. Why me? You could have anyone. Because you're real. Because you've seen me at my worst and didn't judge. Because you work harder than anyone I know. Because you love Emma with fierce devotion. Because you make me want to be better. He paused. And because with you, I'm just James. I'd forgotten what that felt like. I'm terrified. So am I. Terrified I'll mess this up. Terrified you'll realize I'm not worth the risk. You're not broken. Neither are you. But we both have cracks where the light gets in. He held out his hand. Not demanding, just offering. Maybe we can help each other heal. Not by fixing each other, but by accepting each other exactly as we are. Sarah thought about David, whom she'd lost too soon. About 6 years of walls and survival. About Emma upstairs, waiting. About the woman in the emerald dress who'd been humiliated and defended and seen for the first time in years. She took his hand. If I do this, take the job, try this relationship, let Emma accept the scholarship, I need you to understand something. I'm not giving up independence. I'm choosing interdependence. To let someone help while still being myself. Completely different. And healthier. Stronger. Braver. And if you hurt me, I will absolutely haunt you. He laughed, relief and joy flooding his face. I wouldn't expect anything less. Sarah released his hand and headed inside. At the entrance, she turned back. Thank you. For seeing me. For being patient while I figured out how to let you in. Thank you for letting me. Upstairs, Emma waited on the couch, pretending she hadn't been watching from the window. So? Emma asked, voice small and hopeful. Sarah pulled her daughter close. I'm going to interview for that job. If I get it, you can accept the scholarship. And your mother is going to try dating someone, which is terrifying and exciting. Emma threw her arms around Sarah. Mom, I'm so proud of you. For accepting help? For being brave enough to let yourself be happy. Emma's face grew serious. You've taught me to be strong. Work hard. Never give up. But you've also been teaching me that I have to do everything alone. That accepting help is weakness. And it's not. Real strength is knowing when to let people in. Tears built in Sarah's eyes. Good tears this time. Healing tears. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. Later that night, Sarah stood in her small kitchen making tea. She looked around the cramped space that had been her sanctuary and prison for 6 years. The worn countertops she'd scrubbed 1,000 times. The refrigerator covered in Emma's old drawings and report cards. The small table where they'd shared so many meals, so many conversations, so many tears and triumphs. She thought about the woman who'd walked into La Colline 3 weeks ago. The woman who believed her value lay only in how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed, how invisible she could make herself. The woman who'd let cruel words about her hands and dress cut straight to her deepest insecurities. The woman who thought being needed was the same as being valued. But James hadn't needed her. He'd wanted her, chosen her, seen her, and that made all the difference. The real transformation hadn't been James defending her, as powerful as that moment was. The real transformation was Sarah choosing to believe what he'd shown her, that she'd always been enough, that her worth wasn't measured in designer clothes or smooth hands, or the approval of people who looked down on honest work. That dignity came from within, unshakable and true. She'd spent 6 years surviving, but she'd been doing so much more. Loving deeply, working honestly, raising a remarkable daughter, maintaining integrity in a world that tried to diminish her, protecting Emma from poverty's worst consequences, while teaching her that character mattered more than circumstances. Building a life that wasn't glamorous, but was genuine. Her hands might be rough from work, but they'd held Emma through nightmares and fevers. They'd cooked thousands of meals with love as the main ingredient. They'd signed homework folders and job applications and permission slips. They'd scrubbed floors, yes, but they'd also dried tears and built forts and turned pages of bedtime stories. Those hands told a story of survival, of love, of refusing to break under impossible weight. And anyone who couldn't see the beauty in that didn't deserve to hold them. She'd always been enough. She'd just needed to believe it herself. Sarah texted James, "I'm taking the interview. Whatever happens with us, thank you for helping me remember who I am." His response came quickly. "You never forgot. You just needed someone to remind you to look." Sarah smiled, set down her phone, and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow she'd call Margaret. Tomorrow she'd help Emma plan for nursing school. Tomorrow she'd take the next step, not running from her old life, but growing beyond it. Tonight, she'd simply sit with the quiet miracle of being seen, of being valued, of being enough, exactly as she was. Across the city, in a mansion far too large for one person, James Ashford sat in his living room and realized it didn't feel empty anymore. He'd learned that connection wasn't about filling space with things or people. It was about seeing and being seen, about vulnerability and truth, and the courage to admit you needed others as much as they needed you. He thought about the years he'd spent accumulating wealth while losing himself, the way he'd confused success with significance, possessions with purpose, the emptiness that no amount of money could fill because what he'd needed wasn't for sale. Sarah had taught him that, not through lectures or judgment, but simply by being herself, flawed, scared, struggling, but fundamentally whole in ways he'd never been. She didn't need his money to be complete. She'd already built a life rich in the things that actually mattered. Two people from different worlds had found each other in the least expected way. Not because one saved the other, but because they'd both been brave enough to stop hiding, to let themselves be fully seen, scars and all. And in that seeing, they'd discovered something more valuable than any mansion or bank account. They'd discovered that worth isn't given by others. It's recognized. It was always there, waiting to be acknowledged. You are already enough. You always were. The only person who needs to believe that is you.